Hey, what's up, YouTube? We are back with another tier 10 bots stratagem tier list. This is actually one that I actually just recorded about a week ago. Just before this latest update came out, I was like, surely they won't change too many things and I won't have to redo this, right? They did. They changed a lot in this most recent patch, and also bots got some interesting changes as well. So I think it's enough that I want to re-record this to make sure it's as accurate and up to date as possible for you guys. We've also added a couple more letters, as you can see, which you probably might have seen from the bugs tier list, but I just wanted to have a better scale of things. I was finding there was too much overlap, and there's sometimes some confusion of like, I would put something as like a B+, and then as the tier list fills out, it might like drop a little bit. It's not necessarily dropped in my brain, but visually it might. So I think having more tiers, makes things a little bit clearer. And I apologize for, it not being super clear in the past. So let's get into it. Recoilless, absolutely insane for dropship shooting, hulks, factory striders, tap it in the eye. You can one-shot them. Insane, super good. Fabricators sniping as well. Just make sure that you're paying attention to that new resupply indicator on the minimap, because you will need it. But man, if you can make sure to have the resupply near you, every couple minutes, you can just eliminate everything on the battlefield. You are the destroyer of all compounds, destroyer of bot drops. If you can shoot the dropship fast enough, it kills the factory strider before it lands. It's insane. Like, if you get good with this thing, it absolutely nullifies the difficulty of bots. And if you bring two of these things, it makes it even easier because you can just like trade shots back and forth. Really good. Really good. All right. Next, going into the autocannon. Autocannon is a fantastic weapon, as you already know. I don't really need to tell you. It just does everything really well. The flak ammo doesn't really do anything. Oh, just a quick thing. The HE ammo on the recoilless is kind of just a gimmick. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it is there if you wanted to. Same with the flak, though. Wouldn't necessarily recommend using the flak. If you see a gunship, just shoot its engine. It's way more effective. Okay, going into grenade launcher. I think the grenade launcher is a solid, very solid pick on bots. Almost put it into A tier, but the only reason I didn't was because for those like long distance situations, it's kind of hard to use, but it's very viable now because you have the Senator. The Senator has been absolutely destroying hulks, which was the main weakness of the grenade launcher. So in many respects, you could easily put this in A- and off to the races. Bring it with a supply backpack. You will be destroying Devastator hordes a ton. Really good double taps, the vast majority of them. Really good AoE damage, and just strong versus the vast majority of enemies. You're not really dealing with factory striders and hulks all too well, which is why I don't necessarily want to put an A tier, but really, really good option. Highly recommend checking it out. AMR is your next S tier support weapon. Really good. You don't need to bring the supply backpack, but if you do, the AMR becomes like your primary weapon, essentially. Even more so than the autocannon, because it becomes extremely effective at long ranges for taking out Devastators, one-tapping the legs of rocket striders, fairly good against factory striders shooting at the eye, and it can deal with tanks if you can get behind. It can deal with like turrets. It's just a really strong option. Obviously, it doesn't have the destructibility of the autocannon, like dealing with like fabricators and stuff like that, but hopefully you would bring a primary weapon that can deal with those things, or bring like a stratagem that can hopefully help you with those situations. Laser cannon, I'm gonna put it like A-. It definitely feels better than on bugs, and I love the fact that they recently reduced the recoil a ton on it. I just feel like it doesn't have enough fire time before it overheats, and it doesn't cool down fast enough. Those two reasons, I feel like it just needs more love before I put it any higher. In some respect, like it could just be a B tier, but at least you can deal with like factory striders, and it can deal with hulks very effectively if you have good aim. So that's the only reason it goes a little higher than the grenade launcher. Sterilizer, Just D tier. I don't see you wanting to bring this to a bot mission. You just need to require the enemies to get way too close to you before this thing is effective, and it's not that effective versus like a tank or a factory strider or stuff like that. You just have to get so close, and that isn't a good thing. If it had more range or maybe a lingering effect where like you could kind of like fire it into the air and then it would kind of like create a gas cloud in front of you, and then the enemies could like walk into it or something along those lines, maybe be more effective. But this is mostly just a bug stratagem, and we might just need to accept that it is just a bug stratagem. Spear is B tier. It just requires too much ammo to be as effective as a recoilless. If they allowed this thing to like one shot like a sensor tower or a stratagem blocker or something like that, then it would go higher. But it's essentially just doing the exact same thing the recoilless is, but just tracked. And the tracking is both a good thing and a bad thing, as I discussed in the bug one, because it aims center of mass. If the factory strider isn't necessarily looking towards you, you might waste like 3 to 4 shots trying to shoot at a factory strider before it dies, right? Versus like 2 if it was looking at you, right? Yeah, for that reason, it's just it's really inconsistent in how it deals its damage to the higher tier targets. And like, dude, shooting fabricators from across the map, sometimes there's like a random pole or something in the way, or like there's a tank sitting in front of the fabricator that you want to shoot, and like the tracking is like prioritizing one target, or like a rocket strider. It just gets annoying. If they added like a laser guided feature to the spear, it would definitely like go up to A tier immediately, just because you could actually be more precise with it and not have to like rely on the tracking component to like hit the target and hit in the wrong spot sometimes. Stalwart is going to go right next to the sterilizer, and you might be like, isn't it better? No, because light pen is just not very good for bot missions. You already know that. Like, you can suppress targets by just like spraying in their direction, but this is another one of those ones where it's just like medium pen is just too important on tier 10 bot missions because devastators are everywhere, and the TTK is just too long for a light pen weapon that isn't accurate. Light pen weapons work on bot missions, but you have to be incredibly accurate to tap their head. The Stalwart doesn't really give you that ability. It has a red dot, doesn't have any magnification, and it doesn't get to utilize its fire rate, which is like the really good part of it. It got an ergonomic upgrade, which does allow you to be a little bit more accurate because it's not as like weighty, but I would probably stop using it after like maybe difficulty 4 or 5. Because that's when like devastators and tanks and so on and so forth starts to show up, and light pen just is useless against them. Quasar, still a solid option for your bot missions, dealing with fabricators, dealing with hulks and tanks and so on and so forth. But because it doesn't have the damage requirement necessary to crack the dropship in half, it's just not very good at dealing with dropships. You actually shouldn't shoot at a dropship with this thing. Allow your teammate with the recoils to crack it in half. Because if you shoot down the engine, it's not the same thing as shooting the main body of the dropship, it cracking in half and killing all the enemies. You shooting the engine will only really kill like tier 1 bots and like barely damage other enemies. Because essentially like the dropship falls to the ground, then the enemies disembark and walk towards you, right? But if you crack the dropship in half, it does like a big explosion, I guess. And it actually kills the enemies that are attached to the dropship at that time if you're fast enough to shoot down. So keep that in mind. Okay, HMG, very solid A tier. 4 pen, they just got 25 more rounds in the magazine. If you pair this with your supply backpack, fantastic weapon for just mobbing. It even gets better if you wear the handling armor that came in with the Viper Commando. Peak physique armor, really strong for ad clear. Don't really recommend going first person, but just good at hulks, good at factory striders, good at devastators, large amounts of stagger, good at drop ships. And if you bring the supply backpack, it essentially has unlimited ammo. You won't run out. It's just really strong. Highly recommend checking it out. Even with the durability damage decrease, it's still extremely good. It did get that, and maybe it deserves to be a little lower because of that, but I'm still finding that it's killing just as effective as before. I didn't really notice it. EATs are just a solid pick, dealing with fabricators and your tanks, and you're not really shooting down dropships, like I said earlier. Gunships you can use it on. It's a solid option, if you're bringing something that's lighter pen and you need something for like those higher pen targets, like if you're bringing like an MG43 or something, it does pair fairly well. But I'm typically not using it. I'm just bringing a red stratagem to deal with those targets usually instead of bringing EAT. But I can appreciate that the EAT allows for flexibility in your build. People might get a little bit angry at me for this, but I am going to put the arc thrower in B tier. Let me explain. Yes, it stuns it stuns your Hulks, and it stuns lots of enemies, and it has good range now, and it has limited ammo. But it's not very good at killing your heavy devastators, because the first shot doesn't do any damage. It just kind of like knocks them back. Then you need to like hit them. Then you need to hit them multiple times a lot of time in order to kill them. All right, that's the first one. And a lot of devastators are usually engaging you from farther distances than even your arc thrower can land. Okay, and then for Hulks are just dying to Senators now, right? If anything gets even close to you, like Hulk-wise, stun grenade, Senator. So stunning the Hulk is not nearly as important as it once was. Yes, you can use this thing as a stun grenade, but I'd rather just use a stun grenade so I can bring like a recoilless or an AMR or an autocannon or something along those lines. If it was more effective versus devastators and I didn't have to fight it so much at times, shooting over bodies and, the inconsistencies that come with it, I'd probably want to put it higher. But for like general mobbing, I don't always love bringing the arc thrower, and I find it sometimes like very cumbersome to have to use. I'm sure there's arc thrower mains out there that are going to completely disagree with this placement, but I think you could probably appreciate the fact that like there are other weapons that are just more effective at the same task, or just a combination of things that just outdo it, right? Like I would just prefer to bring an AMR with a supply backpack, so I have unlimited stuns, and then like Hulks just fall over in front of me and I can snipe them, right? So it just ends up being more effective with those two stratagems together, rather than like nerfing yourself in the support weapon and like not really killing enemies, just more or less staggering them. Okay, next with the Commando. I think the Commando has basically slipped down. The fact that it doesn't one-shot fabricators has definitely like hurt its viability. You can be fairly good at like utilizing it and like sniping targets, but it's kind of hard to do. And there's definitely more situations where I'd rather just like EAT, and then be done with it on a shorter cooldown than the Commando. It's not to say that the Commando's bad. You can still like kill fabricators and snipe them across the map, but you're having to use more than one. Hulks can obviously die to it. Factory Striders can die to it, but because they've changed a lot of the HP pools on like the Factory Strider, for instance, one Commando is like very hard to make it kill the Factory Strider. Like you have to make sure all 4 individual rockets hit the eye, right, in order to kill it. 3, I'm almost certain, does not actually hit the threshold. So it can be a bit cumbersome to use in those situations. I do like using it, but I would rather use the AT in most situations. Railgun, very solid. I've been having a hard time deciding whether or not I want to put an S tier. In the video I previously posted, I put it in A tier, and I said that if you are good enough with the railgun, I think it easily deserves to be an S tier, because it needs higher charge shots and it needs you to be comfortable with charged weapons in general. Not everybody's comfortable with charged weapons. Most people prefer just to point and click. Now, if you are good with the railgun, I'm going to say it again. It is an S tier weapon. It has good ammo economy, very good damage, one-shots those like turrets, the command bunker turrets, the really annoying ones. It can kill a fabricator from the other side. It's kind of inefficient, but it can. Absolutely destroys devastators. It's like a 60-70% shot, and it just like splits them in half. So like if you have a supply backpack with it, you can just use this as your primary weapon. One taps Hulks if you're very accurate with it. The main reason I would say it's like not an S tier weapon is like it needs probably better magnification to be more usable from the general public. The fact that it has just a red dot makes it hard to use for a lot of players, and it requires a very high degree of precision to be effective versus some targets. So it probably deserves to be in like an A+, but depending on the person, S-. Like for me, like if it was just me, I'd probably put it in S. Okay, we have the flamethrower. I'm going to put it all the way down in D. Just don't bring it. You can. You definitely can. With 4 pen, it's actually not terrible versus the Hulk, but you will lose that fight a lot of the time versus that like close range Hulk. The flamethrower is just not that strong. Okay? So I think that's all I really have to say. It just doesn't have enough range, and it's just too risky to use. But hey, if you want to, you could. MG43, I think, is a very strong contender. That medium pen weapon. You know, you pair this with the Senator, you can actually mob quite effectively versus the vast majority of targets. It feels quite good to use. It just lacks that like extra stopping power and stagger that you get with like the HMG. And like the general like ad clear of like an autocannon or like versatility. It's a very good option, and I do see a lot of people bringing it with supply backpacks, and you know, you will feel fairly powerful. It's just, it is nice to not have to rely on the Senator or a Thermite to kill a Hulk. It can be a little bit awkward in those situations, like requiring the Hulk to get closer to you to deal with it. Airburst, no surprise here, still needs a rework. The lower reload time on it is nice, but there's still too much jank. You know, it will blow up at unexpected times and kill you or your teammates or both, which is bad. It needs to have more of a reliable airburst or programmable options to change. Maybe an explosion pattern that is more circular, you know, spherical. So it's more like reliable at like shooting at the base of like a large group of like devastators, rather than having to like, you know, work out the math of like, I have to aim it just above, and hopefully, you know, I'm not aiming too high, so when it explodes, it kills the majority of them, and I didn't aim too high, so it didn't really just do that much damage. There's a lot of awkwardness that comes along with it, which is not good, and I think it just needs more work on the drawing table. S tier for the supply backpack, no surprise there. It's a fantastic stratagem. For bots, it just gives you unlimited like stun grenades and way more stims for those moments where you're getting chipped down. You can resupply your support weapons that are, you know, basically turn into your primary weapons at times. Yeah, just really strong. No surprise that it's an S tier, I'm sure. Just really good. Okay, going into the Guard Dog Breath, I think it's a little bit better versus bots. You know, being able to, you know, really deal with those enemies that get too close to you, because there's less like regular chaff that's running up to you. I feel like it's not getting distracted as much doing like, you know, trying to kill that streaker that like swooped down on you, or like trying to kill that random scavenger that's like next to you and not focusing on the other enemy. So it can necessarily be like a mobile defense system where like it like stuns the charger that gets too close to you, stuns the berserker that gets too close to you. Maybe stuns the devastators that are on the other side of the wall. It can be fairly effective at that, and it doesn't require ammo, which is nice, but I can't really give it any higher just because it's not very smart. It needs to be smarter and not spend all of its time trying to kill enemies and just like inflict the corrosive debuff on them, or like the gas debuff, then move on to the next enemy. That's how it should work. And it doesn't do that at the moment. Okay, the ballistic Guard Dog. For the first time ever, it's actually going so much higher. And arguably, it could even deserve to be an A tier, because medium pen weapons do so much more effective work in bot missions, and I just find it doing pretty damn good. It ad clears pretty well against devastators. Obviously, it's not dealing with Hulks, it's not dealing with tanks, it's not dealing with factory striders, but it at least deals with like berserkers and your devastators quite effectively. And its ammo economy is quite good, because the ammo of the magazine capacity of the weapon is also at 45 rounds. So I would actually recommend trying it out. Bringing it instead of the spy backpack is kind of viable. Spy backpack obviously is still better, but it's kind of viable, which is kind of cool. All right, Ballistic Shield. Some people are going to be upset with me putting it here, but the ballistic shield just hasn't been very good ever since they added the rocket striders, and there's just still a lot of ragdoll happening, and the ballistic shield does not resist ragdoll, and it doesn't resist explosions. It will break after like 1 or 2 rockets from a rocket strider. Then you're just waiting for the cooldown to get it back, versus like just using the normal energy shield, and like it will protect you in those situations, right? Like, I love the idea of the ballistic shield, but it stopped being effective as soon as rocket striders started being a thing and more rocket devastators started spawning on harder difficulties. It's fantastic on lower difficulties, but as soon as you get to the harder difficulties, like, it really starts to fall down on how effective it actually is. The energy shield, solid A. Great choice. It will reduce how many stims you have to use, reducing chip damage, prevents some amount of stagger, but like, it's just a strong stratagem. You know, like if you find yourself dying too often, this will prevent a lot of deaths. But I would argue that the supply backpack prevents even more deaths because it just gives you more stun grenades and more stims at your, you know, when you need it, right? At command. So very strong. Jump pack, can't really recommend it on bot missions. I do think it's like okay because you'll be able to like do some like pretty cool maneuverability at times, but it's not really helping you fight bots. It more or less just helps you maneuver around bots, which is cool, but it takes a certain type of player to truly utilize that. And for the vast majority of people that are watching, most likely you're going to find the jetpack just not to be particularly useful in bot missions unless you like employ a certain type of like play style to benefit from it. It's more effective versus bugs because bugs are constantly on top of you, so being able to disengage is more useful. But with bots, they're more or less just slowly walking towards you. You could just run faster, or you know, you're just getting shot out of the sky, right? It doesn't really stop that from happening. Both mechs are going to be in D tier, in my opinion. You can make them work, but they just die too easily. And there's so many things that one-shot them. And like you could, like if you are the most passive mech player on the planet, you could probably like keep these alive and like actually get like use out of them. But just there's so many things that one-shot these things. And there's so many things that just like will remove an arm or just like make it worthless. Like I just can't recommend. If they just gave mechs some proper explosive resistance, it would be so much better on the bot front. It needs explosive resistance. It should be able to survive, you know, a factory strider shot or a laser cannon shot, at least one, right? It would make it a lot easier, so at least you're not just like immediately regretting that choice of bringing it, right? Laser guard dog is like C tier, maybe D tier. It can kill a devastator if it gets lucky and hits the eye. It can kill berserkers somewhat. Not particularly amazing at it, but it can do it. And it can kill tier 1 bots, but like, I don't think you should be bringing a backpack for that reason. It's mediocre at best. Save it for the bug front. It's far better in those situations. Maybe if they gave it the proper like scythe, like right now it does less damage than the scythe that we have because it's like a custom scythe. If they gave it the proper scythe damage, I'd probably value it a bit more. But if you're going to bring a guard dog, you bring the ballistic one. It's just better. 110 millimeter rocket pods are like B-. I don't necessarily recommend bringing them, but they can be effective versus tanks and factory striders and like turrets and stuff like that. And like killing fabricators from a distance because they have like a decent amount of homing on them. But it doesn't do enough damage to those higher health targets, which makes me not want to recommend it all the time. And for like hulks and stuff like that, you know, it will often like maim them, but not kill them, which is kind of unfortunate. If they did a little bit more damage per rocket, I think they would kill hulks more reliably. I'd want to use them versus factory striders. If I had more uses of them, I think that would also make me want to use them more often. But only having 3 uses, not being that effective, kind of relegates it to like B-, C+ territory. Like I do see its value in killing like tanks and turrets and stuff like that and fabricators, but that's kind of where it ends. Strafing run. Some people will be disappointed that it isn't higher, but strafing run still feels inconsistent and it needs to have more hit splashes, as I was talking about in the bug in the bug stratagem tier list video. I find too often that Devastators are surviving, and I find that it's not doing that much damage to tanks. I need to throw multiple to kill a tank. I need to throw like so many to kill a Factory Strider. It can kill Fabricators fairly consistently, but you more or less need to be facing it to get the whole length of it. Because if you like throw it while you're perpendicular to it, I find very often the Fabricator survives, and I don't like that. If it was more consistent at like one-shotting it, I would probably put it higher, and then it would be like the ultimate like Fabricator red stratagem killer, because you get 5 of them, you can kind of like throw them around. But like, yeah, it needs to be more consistent for me to want to put it any higher. It's a fun stratagem to use, but if it made a little more of a burst and actually had more like hit splashes, I think it would make it a lot more consistent and like usable versus higher health targets. Eagle Smoke, solid B tier. You know, Smoke is very useful on bot missions, and especially after the patch, Smoke screens will kind of stop bots from like just randomly firing through, which should save you in more situations. I still am seeing bots shoot through smoke and like potentially see you, even though they shouldn't see you right there. I still see them shooting through cliffs and stuff like that and trying to hit you, but it is better. I do recommend probably one person bringing smoke on the team, but that's it, just one person. And it would help for those situations where like you're just like overrun by the enemy and you're like retreating, or like a huge bot drop just happened and you're like, you don't even need to move in that direction. Throw the smoke down, just run in the other direction. It works out. So it's good for that. Napalm, Eagle Napalm is like C+. It used to be like a B-, but now like because of the new structure, it's like, it hasn't necessarily dropped. It's just a little different. Fire doesn't do that much damage to Devastators. They basically need to sit in it and cook in it for a long period of time to actually kill them. You're mostly just using this to weaken enemies, but at that point, you might as well just bring a more devastating stratagem that, you know, like if we had like 8 stratagem slots, Napalm would be okay to bring, but when it's competing against so many good Eagles, there's just better ones out there. Eagle Cluster, I think, is still like an A- pick. Like, it's just a solid pick for like dealing with lots of Devastators and damaging tanks and damaging Hulks. Really strong for just like spamming out when you have like that massive field of like Rocket Striders and Devastators walking towards you. This thing will like mop up a lot of them, or at least weaken a vast majority of them, way better than the strafing run can do, right? Yes, it can't deal with the higher like armored targets a lot of time, but at least it does so well versus Devastators and like chaff in general, like the regular chaff, that like I highly recommend using it. Yes, it doesn't get the Fabricator kills as well, but I still think it does so well against Devastators, and you have 5 uses of it at very large radius that it does really well against bot drops. No surprise at all. You know, Eagle Airstrike doesn't feel like it's been nerfed at all. It's fantastic. It still does a really good job against tanks, turrets, Fabricators, Devastators, everything under the sun. It's just so consistent that it's like a really easy pick for me to put it in S tier. Very easy. 500 kg, right up there next to it. Very good at dealing with your sensor towers, or, you know, your objectives, and you're like, just like general, like really good at like dealing with Factory Striders and dealing with tanks and dealing with, especially now that tanks don't have the I think it was like 6 pen in the front, or is it 5 pen? 6 pen? I think they gave it 6 pen. They took away that 6 pen, so now it's down. So the explosion of the 500 kg should more reliably kill the tanks that you're throwing it at, which is good. I'm going to put Galling Barrage kind of similar to the strafing run. It's good. It's good. But I find a lot of time, unless you're in like a choke point, the Galling Barrage more or less just misses a lot of targets and it doesn't really hit them. You won't get as much value out of it, and a lot of bot drops tend to be quite separate. And because of how separate a lot of the bot drops are, you might throw the Galling Barrage in like one particular area, but you know, the other parts of the bot drop will just like completely ignore it. It's okay to throw at a patrol, but even that patrol will probably just kind of either walk out of it or like survive. Like a Hulk will typically survive the Gatling Barrage unless you get fairly lucky and it like hits the radiator a lot. 380 is going to be like my solid A+ tier. I think I previously put it in S tier, but you know, I heard some arguments that like there are going to be situations where you just get unlucky and like the target's just, you know, 380 just misses, right? I still absolutely love this thing for dealing with like, you know, like a bot base before I walk into it, or like a bot drop spawns. I try to put it like right in the middle of all the ships, and it just eliminates so many enemies for free. And it typically comes back off cooldown by the time the next bot drop happens, which is just fantastic. Orbital Napalm is like a B-. The reason why I'm not putting it any lower, because yes, it is fire, but at least it's so much fire that it should kill a Devastator if it just keeps walking through all the fire. So what you could do is like lay out a bunch of like the napalm between you and the bot drop, and then the Devastators will walk through the napalm, and some of them will burn or at least be heavily damaged. So it's fairly useful in that situation. You're not really dealing with like higher health targets, or like Hulks, I believe, are still immune to fire. The last time I checked, they take fire damage, but they don't take fire damage over time, if that makes sense. So yeah, for that reason, I think it's a B-. It might just be right next to the napalm, but I think it's a little bit better because, you know, you can definitely like set it up a little bit better. 120 million barrage, another really fantastic option for dealing with bot drops. You can throw it at objectives as well. You know, for some amount of time, I didn't even know that it could actually kill a sensor tower. I didn't even know that. But yeah, it can kill a sensor tower as well. So the ISR runs, it's fairly good at killing that, killing the bunkers and so on and so forth as well. Highly recommend using it versus those bot drops mostly. It's not as good versus the bigger bases because it doesn't quite have the radius, but if you throw it at a particular part of that base, it pretty much destroys that part of the base, which is nice. EMS, I'm going to put in like rework or buff. Like I feel like it just needs to affect more enemies, maybe have a larger radius, or maybe just do something completely different because gas has kind of taken its thunder. But let's say like all of a sudden it was able to buff like actually nerf a factory strider, like, and just like not nerf it, but like stun it. All of a sudden it's like way better, right? Making a factory strider go to sleep for like 10 to 15 seconds would actually be like pretty good. And it would make me want to bring it more often than not. Because for those like choice situations where you like need to get close to a factory strider, because we've all been in those situations where like a factory strider lands on top of us and we're like, well, I'm just dead. You know, it's going to turn around and just shoot me with its Gatling sentries. So Orbital Rail, another one that's like a C- D tier. It can do a lot of damage to factory striders. It can one-shot tanks. It can one-shot Hulks, but it just has such a long cooldown that I can't in good conscience put it like any higher than C-. Like I might even be too like kind to it and putting it C. I just can see like some value of like an oh shit stratagem, like a Hulk surprises you out of nowhere and you have to throw it at your feet and it kills it. Like I can at least see the value of like doing it like that way. Laser recently got a little bit of like a buff. It said slightly increase the damage of the laser, but the data miners have told me that it's actually a lot more damage than they let on, and it's killing tanks, factory striders, and Hulks a lot faster than you would think. It's still also really good at like throwing at like the mega base and stuff like that. It will kill a lot of stuff that's just lingering around inside of it. It's quite good at dealing with bot drops, but unfortunately, because it's tier 10, the bot drops are a lot larger, and sometimes it just doesn't have the duration to do as much as it used to do on tier 9. I think I would really like to see the laser like either get like 5 charges or remove the charges altogether and just keep it the way it is. I don't think it would be overpowered if it just lost all of its charges. It still has a very long cooldown, and it's not like as effective as some of these like really good barrages that we have now at times. So Orbital Smoke, I'm still going to put in rework. It probably deserves to be a little higher because at least it's smoke, but I think it deserves to be in rework. please change it. We've been talking a lot. Make it a ring, so when you fire it, like when you throw it down, it like fires a ring of smoke around you, kind of like obscuring you from all directions. I think that'd be so cool, and it would give a purpose, you know, to not bring the eagle smoke. You know what I mean? Gas. I think orbital gas is like okay. It's okay. I think it's better than like napalm at least, because like you're gonna get those choice situations where like, you know, you've like gassed the target and then they turn to their friendly unit and then shoot them because you got lucky, which is nice, and it does like, you know, a fairly good AoE and it comes back very fast, but it's more or less a patrol killer. I use it for like throwing at a patrol, and the patrol is essentially stunned, and then I just use my support weapon to finish off the enemies, right? And that's where I kind of liken it to. That's all it's particularly good at. But I think there are better patrol killers out there if you're willing to use them, like, you know, Eagle Airstrike or, you know, 500 kg or hell, even like Precision Orbital. I'd rather use that. Walking Barrage, I've been seeing the point of it more on bot missions, especially for those like big bases that are very long. You know, you can kind of place it and angle it so it actually affects the entire base. Also, when you're retreating and you have that long line of bots behind you, you know, more often than not, I think it happens that situation where like you just don't want to fight those bots, but at least you can kill them fairly effectively. I still think that the 380 is the better bet out of the two, but just because of like sheer amounts of like how many shots it can do and like how accurate it is in like particular spot. But, you know, if you're assaulting a base and it's like quite a bit in a distance, you can throw this early, and by the time you get there, the stratagem is kind of already walked through. So it's kind of interesting and like World War One-esque of like where it's come from. It's kind of cool. Airburst is more viable now, and I think it's a solid pick, but it feels very average still because it's not really dealing with your higher armored targets. It's more or less like really good for those choke points and like devastators walking in, a barrage, walking in, barrage. And now that there's that longer delay, you now have more time for those devastators to walk forward because they're pretty damn slow. One more barrage or salvo, and then you have the longer delay, I think does help it quite a bit, but it still kind of feels mediocre compared to like other options. I actually would prefer using the other like chaff killing alternatives, as you will. Over Precision, I think still deserves to be an A tier for bots. It's still a very good objective killer, and it can do quite well against patrols. Whereas I think it's lost a lot of its flavor versus bugs. I think it does really well still on like those, you know, obviously high treed planets, but also I find a lot of the bot patrols tend to be like quite close knit, and it has like that consistency where like you can just load like a stun grenade precision and it does fairly well. Also good for like anti-air emplacements that are sometimes dotted around the map. You know, you're not completely cucked because, you know, you brought the 500 kg instead. So I can see the value more when we're talking about bot missions. Okay, now time for Sentries. If you haven't heard in the previous one, all of the cooldowns on like the actual firing ones, so autocannon, rocket sentry, a machine gun, Gatling, and Tesla all got their cooldowns reduced by 30 seconds, and Gatling and machine gun got more ammo, which is fantastic. Still, though, you're going to want to bring the ones that have higher pen, because the machine gun and Gatling sentries sometimes just get caught shooting at like devastators, heavy devastators, and they just bounce all the shots, right? So for that reason, the autocannon sentry is still a good option. It can die fairly easily, so you got to put it in like fairly good spots where it's not going to get shot from like super long range, or you can kind of protect it. Rocket Sentry, the even better option because it has more shots. And if you can keep this thing alive, it can do even better. It's got even really good at like SAM, like surface air missiles, like anti-air. So, you know, still a really good option, and just try and keep it alive. Kind of try to protect it with like shield generators and stuff like that. Both machine guns, I think, are low B. You can definitely bring them and throw them at like off angles, and they can shoot Devastators from behind, but they kind of just fall over a little too quickly to like Rocket Devastators and so on and so forth. They're not bad, and which is why they're still in B tier, but they don't really always perform super well when you have all these like high health targets, and like they're going to be useless against a Factory Strider, tank, Hulk, even like gunships to some extent, because sometimes they're not like shooting very accurately at the engines, and they're like hitting the main hull, and it just takes so many shots for them to kill it. Okay. Tesla Tower is a weird one, and you might be like, why are you putting it in B tier? It's actually fairly good at just being a good distraction. It has a lot of HP, and it's like a decoy turret, right? And I actually enjoyed using it. I actually think it's like even better than like maybe like high B. I might be like a high B. Like Tesla Tower is like a ton of fun to use, and as long as you're not like throwing it where your teammates are going to throw their stratagems, it can be very effective on bot missions. Give it a try and see if you agree or not. Like, it's very tanky, and it can stun Hulk, so it's not going to immediately die to it being meleeed. And I just noticed at times that like you throw it on the stratagem, and then like all the bots in like 100-meter radius stop shooting at you, and they try and shoot this like skinny tower, right? And they'll miss a lot of their shots, giving it like even more uptime, which is really interesting. So it's very odd. And with the lower cooldown, it becomes this kind of like decoy turret. It's kind of odd. Give it a try and see if you agree with me or not. I'd be curious. It's kind of interesting. Okay. Both mortars, I don't think there's any surprise. You put the mortars right up there in A tier. On the defense mission, they immediately go up to S tier. In general, they're never bad to bring on like a 40-minute mission. Just make sure you communicate to your teammates. Hey, I'm using aggressive mortars. Careful. Try to ping good targets. But they do slay out. You can put them behind cover, and they just have amazing ammo economies for assaulting bases and for dealing with bot drops. Highly recommend, and they work really well together if you bring both. So very good. Never a bad option. I'm going to put the HMG in placement B+. The only reason I can't put it higher is because Rocket Striders can be the bane of your existence. One random Rocket Strider that you didn't see lands a rocket on you, it blows up the turret, kills you immediately. It sucks. Also, you have to be somewhat aware of how much health your turret has. If a bunch of Rocket Devastators aim at you and just absolutely annihilate you, the rocket or like your turret will die, and then you will die immediately after, like at the same moment. In the right circumstance, this thing can absolutely slay out and be like nearly S tier, right? It's not dealing with like a tank, and like it kind of deals with a Factory Strider, but this thing can absolutely slay out, and it can be extremely good versus Devastators and Hulks and so on and so forth, right? But it's just you're very vulnerable when you use it, and you have to use it somewhat in tandem with the new shield generator. So for that reason, I think you could easily put it higher, like A tier, if you always bring it with the shield generator, because the things that I just listed out as like destroying you can be circumvented if you pair it with something else, right? Now, the shield generator does have the issue of it doesn't last a ton of time. The new shield generator is like easily like A- probably. My problem with the shield generator is that like it still doesn't have a very long duration, and its max health isn't very high, because all they did was they removed the regen delay, so it's just constantly regenerating health. But let's say like a Factory Strider or like a tank and like, or just a lot of enemies are standing in front of you blasting at this thing, it goes down really fast, right? And you will feel like you are pantsed very fast. Like you will be scared. So I do wish that they increased the duration by maybe 10 seconds, and that they would increase the health, because I still think it needs a little bit more. And honestly, I didn't need the overall larger radius. I kind of felt like it was fine before, maybe a little bit like a meter, but like I feel like they almost increased it too much, that like inaccurate bot fire now just hits the turret more, or like the wall, or the shield generator more often, which means that it even has less HP. Like it goes down even faster. So yeah, I do hope that we continue to get changes for the shield generator. I'm satisfied, but I want more. Okay, with anti-tank mines, I would put in C tier. I think they're decent. For tanks, Hulks, Factory Striders. I've seen a Factory Strider eat like 4 of these because their legs seem to be having like separate hip or HP, and the bleed through damage is not very much. But for like tanks and Hulks, it's quite effective. Helldivers aren't activating them, which is nice. You can kind of throw these out on like an off angle if you notice like a patrol coming, and they're like fairly good. I still think the cooldown is too long for them to be truly effective at the moment, but hopefully in the future that they can reduce the cooldown even more on them. But yeah, if a Hulk walks over it, it's immediately dead, which is awesome. Love that. Absolutely do not recommend bringing the other mines. Maybe they deserve to be and needs a rework, but honestly, they just need buffs. Lower cooldown would make them a lot more effective, so I don't feel like I'm wasting my time with them. And they're like, okay, you can throw them out, and as long as your teammates, don't step on them themselves or don't throw any stratagems at them, they're okay. They can eliminate quite a few Devastators and stuff like that, or, Rocket Striders or Berserkers that are running at you. But yeah, they're just such a long cooldown for like so little uptime, and they just get destroyed so easily. So yeah. But all right, that is the bots tier 10 stratagem tier list. Let me know what you guys think down below. What are you guys running for your tier 10s after the patch? Are you guys using more turrets? I certainly am. Been using the shield generator a lot. Yeah, I think we're definitely moving in the right direction. As I said in my bug tier list, I'm definitely starting to see things move more and more towards A and B tier on average, and I love that. I want to get to a scenario where I'm putting like almost nothing in like C and D tier. That would be a dream for me. But yeah, let me know what you guys think down below. Consider dropping a comment, like, subscribe. There's also my Discord link down below if you guys want to get in contact with me, or come by the stream. I've been live the entire time. We've been doing these tier lists, so you can come talk to me. Usually when I wrap up tier list, I immediately go and like, hey chat, what do you guys think? Let's talk about it. I stream HG2 pretty much every morning except for Mondays. So come on by, and yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time. More tier lists to come. We're going to be doing weapons next. Bye everybody. Peace.